Hello and welcome to the Legal Genie Podcast with me, Lara Quie. Why am I the Legal Genie? Because I bring out the magic in you and help you make your wishes come true. I practiced as a corporate lawyer in London for a number of years before leaving the law to become an entrepreneur and co-founder of a successful designer kitchen business. Upon selling the business 10 years ago and moving to Asia, I moved back into law, but not as a lawyer. Most recently, I was the Asia Pacific Head of Business Development for a leading international law firm. Due to an unexpected life event in 2020, I discovered the power of executive coaching and recently launched Lara Quie Associates, a boutique consultancy which enables me to work with fun and inspiring people across the globe. This podcast explores the fascinating world of the legal ecosystem and the people within it. From rainmakers at global elite firms to trainees just starting to get their feet wet. From Queen's Counsel, barristers, in-house counsel and the judiciary to legal tech innovators, pricing specialists, HR managers, business development and marketing professionals, legal headhunters and everyone else who is a mover and shaker in this space. My goal is to help you see your world differently. What insights can you gain from hearing others share their experiences? What action can you take as a result? I hope that you will be inspired and learn a lot from this episode. Please enjoy the conversation. Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Legal Genie Podcast. And I'm really excited to have Katie Lipp with me on the show today. Katie Lipp is an employment and business litigation attorney who's been practicing for a decade in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. In July 2019, Katie left a large law firm where she was a partner to set up her own firm called the Lipp Law Firm. She has since grown it to 3 attorneys and a paralegal. That same year, as if it weren't enough, due to her passion for mentoring and helping others, Katie launched the Law Practice Queen consultancy to help coach women lawyers and others to build their book of business and create their dream life as an attorney. So welcome to you, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. I actually wanted to connect with you a while back, and I'm huge on LinkedIn, as you know. That's like the only place I do my marketing and networking, and you didn't respond to my connection, and I was like, oh my gosh, she doesn't like me.
Oh dear.
But then I realized that was my brain telling me lies, and then we finally connected, and I'm just so happy to be here on your podcast, and I'm here for it. I'm Team Laura, so...
Well, thank you. I'm slightly embarrassed that I ignored your connection request, but let me just say that yes, it is. I am someone who curates my network, so I must have overlooked you, but never mind. Here we are, and this is the important thing, that we're together today. And
Yes.
So you have such an interesting story, and so I'd like to start right at the beginning, though. So tell our listeners a little bit about your background, what you were like as a child, your aspirations for your career, and, what kind of family life and where you were, etc.
Oh my gosh. So I am from the Northern Virginia area. I have a military family, and we're the only ones out here. Everybody else is on the West Coast. And so, where could I take this? There's so many places I could take this. I have the best family. They're very supportive, but I am the only lawyer in the family. They were actually very confused when I went to law school. They were like, wait a minute, why are you working so late? And why does it take so long to find out your bar results? And what are you supposed to do for a job in the interim? So there was a lot of explaining as the only lawyer in the family on what the industry is like. But going back to my earlier childhood, I was always a reader. I've always been into books and reading, and very outgoing, but also, as I've learned, very introverted. So I get my energy being by myself. And so I learned that over time, I have to be really protective of my energy. And the reason actually that I decided to go to law school is I was deciding between psychology and the law. And I picked law because I thought I would have better job prospects. And I'm laughing because I graduated in 2010, right after the Great Recession, and there were just no jobs to be had. So it's interesting because I was going to do workplace psychology, industrial organizational psychology, and now I do employment law. So I kind of ended up in the same place, which I'm sure you find interesting as a life coach and as an executive coach. It's kind of like, I mean, we kind of follow this like meandering path, but I do think we eventually, if we're listening, to our intuition, I do think we find where we need to go eventually.
Yeah,
as cheesy
absolutely.
as that sounds.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think there's definitely a lot of psychology involved in, dealing with clients as a lawyer, and the psychology of your approach and your tactics in litigation. So there's definitely a lot of psychology. So I can see why indirectly you've still managed to dabble in that area, even though you ended up doing law. So, but when you first started out, I did look, of course, at your LinkedIn profile. And it's interesting that you mentioned that you are from a Army family, because you worked as a law clerk and paralegal for the US Army Warfighter Division, which sounds very exciting, the US Department of Veteran Affairs, and the US Coast Guard. So those are all very interesting. So tell us a bit about your experiences there and what you learned.
So I really wanted to work for the government. My mom basically said, get a government job. It's a safe job. You'll have work-life balance. And that was kind of my mentality going into law school. I'm like, being a lawyer is hard. I don't want to be in private practice. I've heard so many horror stories. And I have a lot of family members that are either military or in the government. And so I was just like, there's something to this. And I started out with the US Army in their warfighter division. It was like reviewing their government contracts. So we would review, they would order different items like for the military, we'd review their government contracts. So I started out doing government contracts. I love that area of the law. It just, within the firm that I eventually went to, it just wasn't going to create a path for me to partner as quickly as I wanted. And so I kind of played around with different practice areas to kind of, I knew I wanted to get to the next step. But to go back to the government stuff, when you graduate from law school, or at least when I did in 2010, there were no jobs, especially in the government. They wanted either somebody that had a few years of experience, or they were taking from like the top of the class. And I wasn't in the top of my class. I was like in the middle of my class. And so I actually applied to be an Army JAG lawyer and Air Force JAG lawyer. So, like you go and you're actually in the military, but I didn't get in. And they said, you would be a good like second applicant, like try again. And I just didn't have the patience. It's like, okay, well, I need a job, so I'm going to go work for this firm. It is a really good lifestyle. I mean, I loved working for those government agencies. It's a great lifestyle. It is very different from being at a private firm. You have lawyers that kind of in the government that view their job like as a job, as opposed to this all-consuming obsession, which I've seen in the private sector, at least in myself. You obsess over your client cases. You want to do well for them. You want to make sure that you're supporting them. So it's a path that my life would have turned out so much differently. And I actually tried it again when I was right before I started my law firm. I was applying to government jobs, and I think it just didn't come to fruition. And, it's one of those things where it's like, well, I'm really happy now, but you always think like, well, what if I had, gotten that job or gone that path? So.
Yeah, it sounds interesting how these paths lead us. Absolutely. Yeah. But tell us a bit about, when you went to law school, and when you were at law school at that time, thinking about your future career, etc. Did you notice anything about the way that law was being taught and the kind of people that you were there, that you were your fellow students?
Yes. So I went to George Mason Law School, it's the only law school in Northern Virginia, right outside DC. And so they have a big focus on law and economics. It tends to attract, now it's actually been renamed the Antonin Scalia School of Law. And so it tends to attract kind of more of like a conservative type law student. It wasn't super competitive. Like people were very collaborative. It was a good environment to go to school. And I was really, really happy that I actually took her off to get into a state school. So I didn't have to pay, private tuition or DC tuition. I wanted to go to a state school. And I'm glad I did that. But at law school, we had the Socratic method our first year. And I do think there's a benefit to Socratic method. I have no qualms with that. I think it teaches you to, represent clients in court. It teaches you to think on your feet. I think it does a good job of that. And I think I understand why they do that. But I think a lot of the missing pieces of the legal education, or at least the legal education I have, it focused more on theoretical as opposed to practical. And we did have, to Mason's credit, we did have a class about setting up a company. We actually created, an LLC. We created a joint venture, just kind of like really got into business particulars. But it would have been nice to have been exposed to more of like the mindset piece, like the psychological piece of running a practice and a business, and then also just running a law firm in general. And who knows? I mean, perhaps they had that class and I just wasn't tuned into that frequency at that time, but I don't recall that ever being offered when I was there. But the mindset piece that's like something that once I kind of started getting into it and studying it and applying it to my life, I was almost mad I didn't know it before. It's like, that was like my immediate reaction. Like, why wasn't this taught like all throughout all of my education, because I've been in school close to 20 years and I never learned this until I started studying it on my own. And when I say the mindset piece, I mean, working on how I view the world really impacts my reality. And once I kind of got over my own internal, I think, lies that my brain was telling me about things I could not do, my own internal limitations, then I really started to, become keen on the idea of opening my own law firm. I just really thought I couldn't do it for whatever reason. My brain said, well, you're not smart enough. You're too anxious. You'll get too stressed out. A man should be at the helm of a firm. That's, people are more comfortable having a male attorney run the firm, that they just respond better to men. And of course, all of those things are not true, but though that's actually genuinely what my brain was telling me, it was shaping my decisions. And once I learned to kind of put that aside and say, well, let me look at this with logic. Okay. A man is supposedly the best to run, a law firm. Well, I've met all these female attorneys that run their own firms, so that's obviously false, right? So I think kind of challenging your inner ego, I call it just kind of my ego or my, your thoughts with evidence. I think that helps you to make better decisions based on evidence, which, we're lawyers, so evidence is good.
So it sounds like you were on quite a journey in terms of having these self-limiting beliefs and you unconscious bias, conscious bias, actually, the fact that you knew, that you were telling yourself things like, oh, a law firm should be run by a man and he should be at the helm. So what began to trigger these changes in your thought processes? What was it?
Yeah, so I was trying to figure out what my next step was. I was told at my current law firm kind of implicitly that there was no equity partner path. And I wanted to own a piece of the company. At the time, I was an income partner. So for those of your listeners, just to give you a sense of the breakdown, usually in the US, there's two different types of partner. You're either income partner or equity. Income means you get money from client matters that you bring into the firm through your own efforts. And then an equity partner is you actually own a piece of the company, a piece of the firm. And I think there's always a part of us that wants to reach the next level. And that's been almost like a character flaw for me. It's like, I'm always like looking to the next thing as opposed to just enjoying what's in front of me. But anyways, I realized there was no path to equity partnership, which is fine. Right. And so it's kind of like the only way I could go up was out. So I knew that I needed to do something. So I was looking for my next step. And what do you do when you're looking for inspiration on your next step other than scroll Instagram? So I was scrolling Instagram and I found a life coach who had posted different things about mindset and, kind of getting to your next step. Her name is Kara Alwell, and I hired her as a life coach. And she really opened my mind up to the possibility of being an entrepreneur. I never saw myself as that and had these self-limiting beliefs that were holding me back in that regard. And it was really like shutting off that as an option entirely. It wasn't like I was being super hard on myself. I don't have like terrible self-esteem. I try to pump myself up and have confidence, but I just never my mind was closed to the possibility. It was like, oh no, that's not for me. And once I saw her content, I was like, well, she did it. She worked at MTV and then started her own life coaching practice and is killing it in the life coaching world. And I was like, well, if she did it, then I can do it. And so I think that's really where Law Practice Queen came from too, is I received life coaching from Kara. And then it was kind of like me passing the torch for women in the legal industry. I was shocked how easy it was to run a law firm. Just shocked. I think that I had this belief that it was so complicated, and really it's, for me personally, I know entrepreneurship is not for everyone, right? I don't want to push that on people if they don't want it, but I was shocked how much easier my life was once I was in full control of my schedule and my meetings and just my time. That was my concern. Before I started my firm, I was commuting every day for at least an hour and a half every day. I was super stressed out. I had been diagnosed with postpartum anxiety and depression. And I felt like every morning getting to work, I was scaling a mountain between putting on makeup, putting on real clothes, dropping my child off at school, getting into the office, parking, walking up in the elevator, all of it I felt like I was just in slow motion, and it just became exhausting. And I also was, I asked if I could work from home at my former workplace. And a lot of traditional firms, I think they want to see you. They want to have you in the office and kind of have that energy. And that was the type of workplace I was in at the time. And so there wasn't that opportunity to work from home. And so I was just like, I have to create something where I can be in law for the long haul, because this is not sustainable for me. I'm too tired. I was just too tired. I was exhausted as a working mom. And I was like, I need the option to roll out of bed and wear sweatpants. And I do it all the time. And most of my clients are, especially now during the COVID-19 pandemic, everybody's, pretty much remote, but there's no reason why lawyers can't just work wherever they need to work, right? And so that was in addition to coming across Kara's content and kind of opening my mind to the possibility of entrepreneurship, and then also wanting to stay in law for the long haul, which I think really my overarching secret goal with Law Practice Queen is to keep women in the legal industry. I think that there's something to be said about having somebody that shows you that it's possible and opens a window into here's my journey, here's my path. It is an option for you. And having kind of mentors and role models show you everything that they're doing. I'm trying to be as transparent as possible. And I get a lot of messages from female law students, female attorneys, and male attorneys, male law students saying, keep doing what you're doing. Like, because of this post, I feel better today. I just feel I was just having a bad week at law school and I didn't really know if I was cut out for this industry. And I think there's a lot of that feeling of like imposter syndrome or lack of confidence because you don't see somebody out there like you doing it. And I think there needs to be more space in the legal industry. There needs to be a bigger tent, if you want to use like the political term. There needs to be more different types of paths and lifestyles. And I think that's what I'm showing people. It is possible. You don't need to be at the top of your class to start a law firm. You don't need a ton of clients to start a law firm. I think there's this mentality that you need this book of business that's like worth $500,000. It's like, no, you literally can start a law firm with no clients. It's maybe not the choice for everybody, right? Because a lot of people have families and obligations and all that, but it can be done. Like my mom actually started her own business and she had no clients. You know, she's a geriatric care manager, has her master's in social work. And she kept telling me, she was like, Katie, I had no clients. You don't need any clients. And once I saw that possibility in me, like, oh, maybe I can do this, I started looking back. I'm like, well, my mom was a business owner and she did it. If she can do it, I can do it. And then my grandfather had his own car wash. He was also an entrepreneur. So it's kind of like once your mind opens up to that possibility, then you find examples to confirm that in your own life. So I think I'm just trying to open people's minds, not push towards entrepreneurship, but at least show them that it's a viable option if they want to choose that path.
Absolutely. I think that these days, the legal ecosystem is huge. You know, there's so much opportunity to carve your own way, as you say. So whether it is you being a private practice attorney and treading the normal, well-trodden path to partnership, or whether you want to go in-house and be more commercially focused, helping to grow a business from the legal angle, or whether you want to have a legal tech company, you know, how can you turn your area of practice into a more efficient and technologically viable business? You know, all of these things are now possible. But I love the way that it sounds like it is a major journey that you were on, from feeling like the path was very obvious and then suddenly really opening your mind to possibilities. And then your circumstances and the daily trudge, the drudgery of your life, you know, the commute. I mean, I was feeling quite exhausted just listening to it and remembering the commute that I used to do many years ago. But yeah, that idea of being exhausted and you haven't even got there yet, to then carrying out a full day's work and often having to stay extremely late and then worried about, you know, the rest that you need and the quality of your work because you're so tired, etc. But I'm just thinking about like the practical side of establishing your own firm. I mean, we have listeners who are all over the world. And as you know, I'm from the UK originally. So the Law Society of England and Wales have very specific rules and regulations with regard to, you know, owning your own practice. And certainly at law school, we were trained. It was kind of, the assumption was that you would actually go away and form a, you know, sort of a smaller high street practice. Although the reality for the College of Law, which is where I went, was that everybody went to the city and we all ended up in big law. But realistically, it was supposed to be the private practitioner, somebody able to have their own practice. So what about from a US point of view? And I know obviously every state has its own rules and regulations as well. So what about Washington, DC, and what sort of practical things do you need for your, setting up? Do you register, or what things are there?
Yeah. So Washington, DC is, so I'm set up to do business in DC and Virginia, and I'm sitting in Virginia right now. That's where I live and work. But I have attorneys that work from home. So I have 2 attorneys that work in DC. So of course they're doing most of their work in DC, and I need to be set up to do business in DC as well. DC it's just a little bit more bureaucratic than Virginia. Virginia has this kind of reputation as like it's friendly for business, and a lot of businesses come here. There's not a lot of red tape. And so there is just a little bit more red tape to doing business in DC. And so you have to, when you go through the registration process, it just involves a little bit more of follow-up. And the best piece of advice I got from one of my friends he does personal injury in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. He said, you're going to make a mistake when it comes to, whether it's registration or your taxes or, just running your business in general. You're going to get a letter from some government agency and they're going to tell you screwed something up. And he's like, the key is do not freak out when you get the letter. Just look at it, try to understand it, and then hand it off to the person that does that for you. And so I really took that to heart. It actually happened recently. So your registration with basically like the office that DC has, DCRA, which handles your registration, we check on that for our clients because we do business law. And I noticed that one of their registrations had fallen through and they had to renew it. And I was like, well, let me check on mine. And the status was not active. And I had never even received any communication from them to say like, hey, renew this, or hey, like you should fix this. And it took me 5 minutes to fix it. But I thought back to when my friend said, it's going to happen. Don't freak out when it happens. Just like, he said, hand it off to the person that handles it. Well, that was me. I didn't have anybody handling it for me at that time, but it took 5 minutes to fix. And some money, that's the thing. DC, it costs, the taxes are higher in DC, and it is what it is. It's just life in the big city, and, you have to pay to play. But the practical, I think that piece of advice, like you're going to make a mistake, but it's not rocket science, and it's just a matter of making sure that your registrations are up to date with the government, making sure, the best business law advice that I try to follow myself and give to my clients is not to commingle, keep everything separate, like your personal stuff separate from your business stuff. And I think as long as you have that, again, going back to the mindset piece, as long as you approach things from the demeanor of like, don't freak out. It's not a big deal. Really, most things that I think by reframing the mindset into, is this a big deal? Is this going to matter 5 years from now? And I have the kind of the benefit and also maybe the downfall of like, I've had a near death experience before. And I feel like once you are faced with like, or having seen, like I saw one of my close colleagues pass away very quickly, like without any warning. And it's like, once you are exposed to things like that, I think it just puts things in a lot of perspective for you. And not to make things like morbid or anything like that. But one of the exercises that I do with my coaching clients is I have them kind of sit down and write their eulogy. What do you want people to say about you after you're gone? Because it's really like, time here is short, and you just want to make sure that you're contributing to the betterment of this world and kind of leaving your mark. And sometimes that can feel a little bit overwhelming, but I think that's how I was feeling when I was in Big Law. I kind of felt like, what is the point of all of this? I'm exhausted every day. I'm, barely seeing my family. When I am seeing my family, I have no energy left. And I just needed to get to a place where I was feeling better on a day-to-day basis. So I had more to give really to my family and then also to my clients. And I think the mentality within the legal industry is work until you like die at your desk. And that doesn't benefit anyone. Like that shortens your life. So you're giving less to the legal community. You're probably going to burn out and have to leave law, which I'm trying to prevent with Law Practice Queen by supporting female lawyers, but just trying to think of it as more of a long-term game as opposed to this, let's squeeze as much out of you as possible. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like your two businesses very much a lifestyle choice, right? They're sort of built around your lifestyle and what you want to do with your time and where you want to direct your efforts. And I think when you hear about people starting a startup, there's all that talk about, wow, it's complete chaos and 24-hour days for the first 4 years. And, and right, that's the kind of impression you get of these frenzied startups. But I mean, that's, I suppose, in the tech space where it's all about, the funding, etc. But where you're building a business organically, as you are, and basically expanding every time you have the need, where the client demand outstrips the resources you have, it sounds like it's something very manageable to be able to, the fact that you've been able to start a separate consultancy at the same time as your law practice means that there must be some way that you're juggling everything. I mean, how have you managed to divide your time?
It has been a challenge. I will not sugarcoat it. That's what I worked on with my coach, Kara Allwill, is trying to set aside Fridays for coaching and for high level marketing. Like, a lot of what is frustrating sometimes about running a law practice is you have a lot of administrative demands that just suck you dry. It's like there's always something you can attend to. And so just I try to carve out Friday as kind of, I tell my employees, look, if it can wait until Monday, like let's talk Monday. So I will, of course, support them if they need something, and same with my clients, but I try not to schedule anything on Friday so I can have that empty space. I try to schedule as much empty space in my calendar as much as I can, because that's how I think of new things, and I give my brain a break. And if I'm scheduled to the max, it is not sustainable. It's just exhausting. And I worry when I see other lawyers and business owners doing that, because I'm like, oh, they just need some downtime. So I cannot overemphasize the power of downtime. Some days I struggle with that, of course, but I do set aside that Friday and try to do that time blocking. And then for my Law Practice Queen initiatives, I'm working on a membership program right now, the Law Practice Queen Network, and I'm working on a book. And I was struggling to push the needle forward with those projects. And so what I ended up doing was saying, okay, on Sundays for 30 minutes, I'm going to focus on it. Just 30 minutes. And of course, the 30 minutes turns into an hour, which maybe turns into an hour and a half. But it's like, again, that mindset piece of like, just a little bit. You just gotta touch it just for a little bit, 30 minutes, you can do it. And then once you get into it, I do the same thing with cleaning my house. It's like, I'll clean this room for 10 minutes. And then of course, like once you get going, you're like, okay, I can do 5 more minutes. But I think I really try to do that time blocking method. That seems to work well for me. And then I'm actually reading a book right now. It's called Essentialism. There's actually a really cool diagram in the book about, it's like a ball of energy. And if the energy is going in all these different directions, the ball doesn't move forward, right? But if the energy is going just one direction with the ball, it moves forward, and it moves forward quicker as opposed to just being pulled in all these different directions. And I'm such a visual person. And once I saw that, I was like, of course, like you have to scale down in order to move these projects forward. And it seems obvious, but I think as entrepreneurs or business owners, the trap is you can do so many different things. And last year I was struggling with, I was working on a podcast, and I was working on a book, and I was working on one-on-one coaching. And then I have a Law Practice Queen LinkedIn group, and I was working on that. And it's like, you get so torn that you're really the master of none, so you want to really, I think this principle applies to business development. It applies to running your business. It applies to studying within, law school. It's like, if you want to move the needle forward, you need to drop all the distractions and focus on one thing as much as you can. I mean, you can multitask, but that's how you move the needle forward. And so that's what I've been implementing lately for Law Practice Queen and the law firm, just focusing on the law firm, Monday through Thursday. It bleeds into Friday, of course, because, I do non-compete litigation. Everybody wants to like drop lawsuits and demand letters on a Friday. And then delegation, like I delegate, like it's, I say like it's my job. It is. Yes. I really do delegate as much as I can. I brought on a new attorney in November, and we're just continuing to just load her plate up as much as possible and just think, how can I support my clients and also, maintain my sanity? I think that's the key. I mean, the reality is I do more with my law firm than I do with Law Practice Queen, because Law Practice Queen is a baby, right? Like Law Practice Queen is something I started just recently. Even though I started my law firm in 2019, it was a practice that I had been building for 10 years. So that's further along. That's more mature, if you will. It's more of like an unruly teenager at this point. So it's, it's one of those things where it's fun because I can take it in a lot of different directions, but you have to also be consistent with your market to kind of communicate, like, here's what I'm doing, here's what I do, here's how you can use me. And with Law Practice Queen, the distinction between legal services and consultancy is, as a consultant, it's always optional, right? As a lawyer, people sometimes have no choice but to, they may not have to hire me, but they need a lawyer. And so that's kind of the key, is like creating different options and price structures where it makes it easy for people to consume your content, as opposed to, making the decision, well, that's, that maybe another time, you want to. And so that's what I'm doing with the membership program with the Law Practice Queen Network, is kind of doing it's a monthly subscription, like a Netflix subscription, where it's like you can access me once a month on a group coaching Zoom call. You can access the full network. You can access my content people want content in bite-sized pieces. Because again, going back to that, that energy principle, like we're pulled in a lot of different directions these days. And it takes a lot of effort to stay focused. The default is you get sucked into whatever somebody else wants you to do, right? Which time is short. Like we have to complete our journeys, which again, I feel like I keep taking this in a morbid place. I don't mean it that way.
And so I've noticed that obviously you're very active on social media. So you're, very good on LinkedIn, but I think you're also on Facebook, you mentioned Instagram, and you've got 2 websites, your Lipp Law website, your Law Practice Queen website. How are you managing to come up with content and actually get it out? I mean, that sort of stuff is very time consuming. How are you managing all of that?
I'll just walk you through the process. When I get an idea on something, it's usually during my downtime. That's why downtime is so important. That's when people make discoveries. Like if you look at the history of when things are discovered, it's when people are just kind of fiddling around, walking around, not really doing anything. And so that's why downtime is very important. So I'll be on a walk, or maybe in the shower, or maybe I'll just I have a massage chair in my office. I'll just kind of be like sitting in the massage chair or walking my dog, whatever. And I'll be thinking of something, and I'll try to, if I get the idea on a post or whatever, I'll try to sit down and write it there. I'll try to stop whatever I'm doing and sit down at my computer and type it out and then post it. So that does require a bit of flexibility that not everybody has, right? Like I realize that lawyers running a practice, sometimes you can't just drop everything to spend 45 minutes on a social media post, but that is my process, because I think the reason why my posts are successful is because it's an energy transfer. The state that I'm in when I'm writing it, and I'm very passionate about it, it comes through when somebody is reading it, right? They feel me, right? And that's why it is likable. That's why it's relatable, is because it relates back to something that perhaps they've gone through themselves, or they've seen, or they resonate with. And so I'll really try to just write it and get it out. That's why I like LinkedIn. And that's really what drew me to the platform. It's very easy to post something on LinkedIn. You don't need any technical skills. You just need a concise message that resonates with people who are looking to elevate their careers. And what better place if you're supporting businesses or you're supporting law firms and lawyers? I mean, everybody that's professional is consuming content on LinkedIn. So I think the energy transfer piece is sometimes what's missing when you see a post that kind of falls flat, which you'll have those, right? And I think the intent of the post is really important too. It's like, who is this helping? What am I trying to accomplish with this post? And I think for me, with my coaching, I'm trying to coach myself 5 to 8 years ago when I had no idea how to get clients. I was so confused on that whole process. I was trying to go straight to C-level executives and say, hi, my name's Katie Lipp. I can help you with things. And they're like, no, thanks. It's much better to develop a network of attorneys that you know and like that can refer you work. And that's really what got my law practice going, is word of mouth referrals from other attorneys and developing those attorney relationships, but then also not taking from your network, but giving to your network. And there's a huge difference there. And the point of your post should be to give. You should always be giving. And a lot of people ask me, well, how much is too much? And I'm like, well, everybody has different boundaries, right? Like, you have to decide that for yourself. But if you're giving general advice about what you do and how you help people, I don't think you can ever give too much of that, because it's your business. How much do you want to grow your business and spread the word about how you help people? How much is too much? I mean, I think the people that are asking that question, they're actually asking a different question, which is, how do I stop giving people free legal advice on the internet? Which is, you just do it and you do it now. Like, you do not give free legal advice on the internet, because I mean, the reality is, or consult, a lot of people reach out to me with paragraphs long of their life story and, can you help me? And it's like, yes, I can help you, but I reserve this type of feedback for my coaching clients. And, I have a process that I go through to see if we're a good fit for one another. So I think putting up those like paywall boundaries are very important, because that's how you earn a living. You can't just, you can't let the world suck you dry. And I think that's a hard lesson learned, particularly I think for female attorneys, where you just want to give, right? You just want to give and give and give. And it's just not the way again, it's not sustainable. So you have to be cautious of that.
That's right. It's, you have to be going with a giving, generous mindset.
Yes.
And BNI, Business Networking International, if you may know it, has the phrase "givers gain." And it's very much that mindset that, the more you give, the more the universe answers with things for you. And it's really a question of focus and where you place your mind and your energy and your efforts. Those come back to you multifold. So it's never wasted. And also, you mentioned about what would somebody want their legacy to be, long term, and after they've gone and during their lifetime. And certainly that would be, that this was a helpful, nice person that made a difference. So yes, in your coaching, you mention a lot about you help women build a book of business, and you did touch on a little bit of that earlier, but considering people, most of our listeners will probably be in larger law firms. They're probably in private practice. What advice can you give to them? Let's say they're a partner in a firm, or, an aspiring partner, and they're in, another area of law, maybe not necessarily employment law, but what could they do to build their practice?
I would first make sure that the practice you're working on is something you enjoy. I think a lot of people, when they're thinking of building a book of business, they're like, how can I come up with like this market strategy that will give me all the money? And you want to focus on what you enjoy first which will yield money. Like, no doubt, you will get money for it. I think instead of putting money first as the goal, which inherently will not give you joy. Like, it just won't. Studies show, like, the more money you have, it does not equate more happiness. In fact, there's a bell curve with happiness and how much you earn. It actually goes down as you become more of a high earner. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. Sorry to say that. But I would focus on, what type of case do you like? If you could have any case in the world, what would that be? And then market that one case. And so for me, I like non-compete litigation. I like helping tech companies. And so I just niched down and said, I do non-compete litigation for tech companies. Is that all I do? No. But my market message is very narrow, because we have monkey brains and we cannot remember and we are distracted. And so you want to communicate with your network. I do this thing, and this is what I do. And that's it. You just want to spread the word about what you do. Don't ask people to hire you. Don't ask people to call you. That comes off as putting too much desperate energy into it. It's like, you want to view it like dating, right? You wouldn't go around saying, call me, hey, call me. It's like, no, that's creepy. Okay. We don't want to be creepy. We want to be helpful. And how do we be helpful? How are we making our impact? How are we helping our network? We are telling them what we do. So when they come across a case like that, they think of us. So for example, when I first implemented this like non-compete litigation strategy, I was networking, back in the olden days of handing around business cards at a networking event. And I came across another lawyer who was in-house, a construction lawyer. And I said, I do non-compete litigation, and he seemed totally disinterested. But I still, chatted with him. We exchanged business cards, and I said, okay, it was great talking to you. Then 2 years later, he had a neighbor who started her own tech company and ended up in a non-compete dispute. You can't make this up. Called me and said, hey, my neighbor recommended you. He said that you do non-compete litigation for tech companies. And I said, I do. That's me. And I ended up representing them, and I still represent this company. They, I got them through the dispute, and they're flourishing now. And it is just too crazy, like how you ask and the universe responds. So just be very narrow. So I think the mistake that a lot of lawyers and law firms make is they want to be a full service law firm, which is great. It's great for business to be a full service law firm. Don't stop being a full service law firm, but in your marketing message, you need to communicate, what do you do differently from the millions of other, lawyers that are out there? What's your niche, right? So communicate your niche. And instead of communicating your umbrella. So I think people communicate their umbrella, which is my umbrella is I do employment law, business law, I do commercial litigation, I do IP. It's like people cannot remember all those things, and they won't think of you. The goal is to be top of mind. The reason why social media marketing is so impactful is because people are scrolling and they see, oh, Katie Lipp. Oh, Katie Lipp's posting on employee handbooks. Oh, that's cool. So then when, somebody needs help with an employee handbook, then they think, oh, well, Katie knows about handbooks. Katie can help with those things. I think, and the reason why you want to be consistent with your social media marketing is people forget about you. It's not malicious. They're not like leaving you out in the cold. They're just busy. And so you need to keep reminding them of how you help. Remind them of how you help and be consistent. And if you're constantly saying, I do business law, I do employment law, I do this, I do that, people just cannot remember that. People need a quick snap of Katie does non-compete litigation. So that's the message I would recommend to, the people within a big firm is do that small marketing message as opposed to the big. And then also network with other attorneys. Attorneys come across more clients more often. Instead of focusing on getting to the direct client, focus on getting to building your attorney network and just build it, continue to build it. And all you do with that is you talk to attorneys you know and like. And the best lesson I think I learned with building a network is you don't have to hang out with people that you don't like. You don't have to do that. I think a part of me for a while was like, oh, I should definitely network with this person, even though they're rude and condescending, because they'll help me get to where I need to go. And that's the wrong thing. It's you need to focus on giving as opposed to taking from your network. And so how can you help your attorney friends? Because if you help your attorney friends, just like you help your social network, it will eventually come back to you in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very much that the generosity of spirit will be reciprocated if you can help first. And the concept of helping other lawyers who, as you say, are far more likely to come across legal work. I think here in Singapore, there's so many large firms and they're all competing with each other and they're all full service. So it's very difficult. Lots of the lawyers will already have people within their firm, that they have to give the work to. So it's harder to find lawyers that they can actually pass the work to, because that would be like passing it to their competitors. But I think in terms of overseas lawyers, that definitely works. So trying to find lawyers at law firms that don't have a large international network. So well-established firms in a local market. If you've got any cross-border issues that you can refer, that's always helpful. But have you ever done collaborations with financial advisors or accountants, auditors, and people in professional services, but who are doing something complementary?
So, you know what? I haven't gotten into that as much. My colleague, Ryan, he runs my transactions practice, he's huge on that and he gets a ton of work from that. And I think that is always a great place to find business. That's always something that works. I think I just haven't, it's like, I always mean to do that, but then I just like haven't followed through with that. And so I think that's such a good place to find business. But to your point, real quick, I want to go back to your point about how Singapore has big law firms and they don't want to give work to people being perceived as competitors. There's one thing I would say to that is it's always good to network with your competitors. Number one, because then you can kind of figure out what is your differentiator, like what are they all about and what makes you different, right? And see where you're at in the market compared to other firms. But then also, you never know when another firm is going to get conflicted out of a case. And at my prior law firm, there was actually a huge litigation case we got because of a conflict. And it was just a matter of somebody picking up the phone and saying, hey, we got conflicted out. Do you want this cherry of a case? And so even if you're swimming in the same lanes, I think there's definitely something to be said about, keep your eye on, your swim lane but also thinking about how you can kind of leverage those opposing counsel relationships. I think that's something I always struggled with, not being so adversarial with the other side and instead being more collegial. And that's something I'm always working on because I get so passionate and so worked up for my clients. And that can be abrasive, right? And one of my really good friends, he does criminal law. And he gets a ton of work from his opposing counsels. He's like, oh, you're missing out on like a huge world of potential referral work if you're like alienating your opposing counsel. And I'm like, well, yes, you are correct. And I think it actually spoke more towards I get so like stressed doing litigation. So I'm actually moving away a little bit from the litigation and more towards like HR and consulting and all that, because I like the counseling end. But anyways, to go back to your point about potential referral sources, CPAs are a great place, and financial advisors, it's a really, really good place to find kind of referral networks as well, like those other service industries. And I think you're spot on with that, Lara.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the podcast. I think we've kind of gone over, but it was also interesting. You had so much to say that I think is interesting, so I didn't want to cut you short. But let's end with your final piece of advice. So think of those, young women lawyers out there. What would you like to tell them?
Just don't take it so seriously. Like, just take the pressure off and just try to have fun. I feel like there's this mentality that law can't be fun. It has to be like so stuffy and serious. But I really think that clients will find you more approachable if you don't come across as this like law robot. We're real people. And I think bridging that gap between the general population and the legal community is something that you should always strive to do. And you know more than you think. Like, when I first graduated law school, I was like, what do I know? What do I know? And it's like, I just went through 3 years of law school. Like, you know so much more, and you can always be helpful to someone. I think that's I had that feeling when I first started Law Practice Queen. It's like, who could I help? Who could I really help? And it's like, wait a minute, I have a lot to give. Even though I'm not as far along as somebody else, I have a lot to give. So just kind of standing in your power and realizing that you have a lot to give to this world and owning it.
Absolutely. Well, I think you've definitely got a lot to give to this world, Katie. So thank you very much. Just lastly, where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so for a Law Practice Queen, lawpracticequeen.com, you can reach me there, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Katie Lipp. And I'm working on my new membership community for Law Practice Queen, the network. So if you want to sign up for my newsletter to stay posted on when that will drop, you can go to lawpracticequeen.com, scroll to the bottom, and sign up for my newsletter.
Great. So thank you very much, Katie.
Thank you so much. Take good care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Legal Genie podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give it a rating and review to help others find it. Please do subscribe so that you don't miss the next exciting episode of the Legal Genie podcast. Thanks for listening. Have a magical week ahead.